Welcome to another podcast episode of Joe Riley on drug testing in America. Today's episode, Understanding Drug Testing Panels, 5-panel, 10-panel, and beyond, with your host, Joe Riley, President of National Drug Screening.
Hi, Jesse. Glad to be back here on our podcast on drug testing in America. We have a good topic today that a lot of people may enjoy, especially people that are in the drug and alcohol testing business, about understanding drug test panels. And we talk about traditional 5-panel drug test, 10-panel drug test, and beyond that. So there's a lot going on there with panels. We'll start, Jesse, if you can talk about our sponsor.
We welcome Joe Riley and Associates. They are a consultant for the drug testing industry. They offer expert witness services, marketing and sales consultation, policy writing, new startup comprehensive training and consultation, plus drug-free workplace trainings.
Awesome. So our guest today is Tom Fulmer. Tom Fulmer is the Vice President of Business Development for National Drug Screening. Welcome, Tom.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it. Look forward to being on the podcast today.
Absolutely. Glad to have you, Tom. And can you share with our audience a little bit about you and your journey into the drug testing industry from the time you entered until now?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. It's been a little while now, back in the day. And so I'm obviously Vice President of Business Development here at National Drug Screening, oversee all aspects of that. But prior to coming to the National Drug Screening, I really didn't have any experience in the drug testing industry. And having built several companies over the years, I'd never even drug tested an employee, never had a drug test, and never even really considered it. And so this industry was kind of a new change to me. And, Joe, you and I go, way back in the day through chamber and all that kind of stuff. And when we caught up and started discussing this opportunity, I started looking into it and found it to be a very, very interesting opportunity, and learned a lot about that in a fairly short period of time. Had the benefit of your expert tutelage, having been in the industry for many years. I came from a background in accounting originally, and I graduated with a degree from the University of Alabama. Everybody knows I'm a big Crimson Tide fan, and immediately, yeah, I know exactly. Immediately did not take up accounting and went and became a tennis pro for about 10 years, and then built a few other companies along the way. And kind of that evolution led me into things with sales and marketing and business development, which led us to connect here. And as I got started in the industry, you sent me to quite a few conferences out there, and I got a chance to meet a lot of professionals in the industry. Of course, everybody knew you from being in the industry, which helped open a lot of doors and got me a lot of training. And within that first year or so, I got a lot of my credentials, which I already had as a professional speaker and trainer. But as far as learning the drug testing industry itself, and that was coming up on 10 years ago or so. And just from there, it's evolved, and I've gotten the certifications to be a trainer for pretty much everything related to drug and alcohol testing. I have spoken at conferences all over the country. I've written articles for a variety of different publications, done tons of videos, done different interviews, things along those lines, and that's kind of led us to where we are today. And I've had a great opportunity to work with you and with a great team here at National Drug Screening.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Tom.
Yeah.
It's been quite the journey, just about 10 years, and you really immersed yourself into the industry. Mm-hmm. But tell me, what's really big on the horizon for you in the coming year and into 2026?
Well, going into 2026 for me personally, I'm looking forward to building our team and continuing to expand that out there. But I'm also been serving on the board of directors for the Substance Abuse Program Administrators Association, one of the oldest existing drug and alcohol industry organization that's out there. And I'm the incoming president. I'll be inducted as the new president of the organization, the national organization, in October out in Phoenix, Arizona. So looking forward to that. I've got a lot of plans on the horizon for that organization and things that we're going to be doing there, and that's a big part of that. A lot of good things going on.
Yeah, that's big on the horizon, and I'm glad you pointed that out. It was almost a trick question, but yeah, I'm excited for you too, because that's going to be really a good way to show your leadership. And you talk about meeting people in the industry. I served as chairman of the board of the Drug and Alcohol Testing Industry Association for 4 years, and you meet so many people and so many new people. So it's going to be real exciting for you, and I look forward to that for you also. Yeah. But let's get into our topic, which is understanding drug test panels, 5-panel, 10-panel, and beyond. Tom, I asked you to put together some questions that you get from customers and prospects and people in the industry or team members, questions about drug testing panels. So let's go ahead and get started with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of confusion around what panels are and what they mean and how that's understood by employers. So I think one of the key questions is understanding, why drug testing panels are important to employers. What do they need to know about drug testing panels as it applies to them and in the employment world?
Good. So, for DOT-regulated employers, trucking companies, aviation, oil and gas pipeline companies, anybody regulated by the United States Department of Transportation, it's really easy, okay, because they are required to do the SAMHSA 5-panel drug test. We'll talk more about what's in a 5-panel drug test, so there's no variation there. But for all other employers that are non-regulated, not regulated by DOT, there's a host of different panels that they may do. So the company that's doing drug testing, as well as their vendor that's providing drug testing, really needs to know what they're testing for. A lot of times companies, they don't even understand what they're testing for or don't even know what to test for. So it is important to understand panels. We have a standard 5-panel we'll talk about. We kind of have a standard 10-panel that we'll talk about. But other than that, we could be adding fentanyl, we could be adding tramadol, we could be adding ketamine. So it is really, really important for both employers that are doing drug testing and service agents like ourselves that are selling drug testing to really understand what type of offerings we have.
Yeah, and it's interesting, because we talk about panels and it's important to understand the drugs that you're testing for, like you mentioned. But I think there's also some confusion. What do they mean by drug test panel? What exactly is a panel in a drug test? How's that defined?
That's a great question. So really defining a drug test panel is we're doing drug testing. We call it a panel, but what exactly is the panel? It's basically one or more drugs, okay? And the basic is a 5-panel, and that kind of comes from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, as well as DOT and state laws have followed. So we kind of have the basic common drugs that are in all panels almost, marijuana, cocaine, opiates, which includes a whole host of stuff along with it, which we'll talk about, amphetamines, which includes methamphetamine and ecstasy, and then also PCP or pencyclidine. So that's a 5-panel. There's a big difference between a 5-panel and a 10-panel and beyond the 5-panel.
Yeah, so I guess to kind of add a little additional clarification to that, so a panel, is a panel a specific drug, or is it a category of drugs, or how does that actually qualify?
Yeah, so it's really not a specific drug unless the panel only includes one drug, there could be a 1-panel drug for marijuana. It's not really a category of drugs because within different drugs there's a category, but then there's certain drugs within that drug category. So maybe to help make it a little bit clearer and cleaner, I'll talk about the 5-panel. We'll talk about it in terms of the DOT 5-panel, which we also call a DOT-like panel when we talk about a non-DOT testing program. As I mentioned, we're talking about amphetamines, which includes methamphetamines and ecstasy. So we have a category, and then we have 2 other things within it. We're talking about cocaine, which is kind of a standalone, marijuana, which is kind of a standalone, pencyclidine or PCP, which I don't know that many people use that anymore, but they still come up with positives for PCP. That's why they keep it in the panel, in the standard panel. And then we talk about opioids, which includes codeine, morphine, heroin, plus what we call expanded opiates of hydrocodone, hydromorphone, oxycodone, and oxymorphone. So we got what we call a 5-panel. It's 5 categories of drugs, but if you counted them and added them up, I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Some people call it a 12. Some people call it a 8, 7. But it's really a 5-panel. It's 5 categories of specific drug metabolites.
Yeah, and that's interesting to kind of to think about it in that perspective. And I know you mentioned like the DOT, which is only lab-based testing. So how do panels apply to to like instant testing or to other specimen types? Because I think the ones, like DOT is right now is just urine. So how does that affect those other specimen types and whether it's instant or lab-based?
Yeah, so you got instant testing, which can be urine or oral fluid, and you've got hair testing, which is hair, but they can really have, with hair, you're going to have the same panels, more or less. You wouldn't have the DOT panel because you can't use hair for DOT. With instant testing, it's a little bit different because when we test for opiates, for example, or amphetamines, for example, each metabolite is one drug in an instant test. So we could have a 5-panel drug test that is amphetamines, methamphetamines, cocaine, marijuana, and PCP. Maybe no opioids because we're counting amphetamines and methamphetamines as 2. Typically, if opioids is on the panel, it's going to pick up the codeine, morphine, and heroin under opioids, but if you want the expanded opiates on the instant testing, they're typically adding oxycodone.
Well, so there's a lot of different options out there, it seems like. So how does an employer really go about deciding, which panel to use? Is it mandated? Is it a choice? Is it a combination of those things?
So for DOT, it's definitely mandated. We're definitely doing that DOT 5-panel. For non-DOT, there's a couple of considerations. State laws is a consideration. Where do you operate? And are there any laws that say what you need to do? And there might be a state law that says drug testing must abide by the DOT regulations and use the same panels. So that's the option there. You use the 5-panel. There may not be any state regulation, or it may say you need to do more than the 5-panel. I believe there's one state, West Virginia, in the mining industry where you have to do a 9-panel. So I wanted to go back and circle back to where we talk about the standard 5-panel, and then we might talk about what's commonly known as a 10-panel, and it's kind of a standard. It's just evolved into being a standard. And so we take that first 5 drugs that we talked about, and we add 5 more, and those 5 more are barbiturates, benzodiazepines, methadone, propoxyphene, and methaqualone. Now, having methaqualone on there is a little bit confusing also because nobody's done Quaaludes in probably 15 years. Jesse, how long since you did them?
Before my time.
Before your time. And so some employers or some labs actually are dropping the methaqualone, so we have a 9-panel. So I'm aware of one state law that says you got to do a 9-panel. Okay, so then you have other considerations. Maybe the non-regulated employer has some type of contractual obligation to do drug testing because they do work for maybe a larger company. And that larger company says, well, this is the panel we want you to do. So it could be based on a contractual obligation. Other than that, employers, typically, they really don't know what to do, okay? So the 5-panel is certainly an option because it's a standard and it's what's used in the transportation industries. But some companies have looked at, well, people are abusing, barbiturates, and people are using Xanax, when they're not supposed to be, and abusing benzodiazepines and maybe methadone users. So they want to go to an expanded panel, a 10-panel. It's without any regulation or contractual obligation. It's really kind of an employer preference. And today we may see people dropping marijuana from the panel because some companies are not looking to test for marijuana, or there may be some restrictions in the state where they operate on marijuana testing. And some companies might be looking to add maybe something like fentanyl, which, of course, as we know, has become a popular drug over the last 5 or 6 years. And in certain pockets of the country that it may be more widespread use of fentanyl. So, hey, maybe we should do that 10-panel and add fentanyl. Does that make it an 11-panel? Not really. I'd still call it a 10-panel plus fentanyl. Because if you ask me for an 11, a 12, a 13, or a 14, I kind of know what the first 10 are, but I don't know what the next ones you want to add are. I don't know if it's fentanyl or mepridine or tramadol or ketamine. I don't know what you want to add unless you specifically tell me. So that's where panels can get confusing.
Yeah, and with all the different ones out there and different risk tolerances from companies, I imagine making that decision, varies a good deal when there's not specific mandates for that. And one of the topics you touched on was marijuana. So how are employers handling marijuana in states where it's actually legal? I mean, how does that come into play, and what steps are they taking in regard to that?
Yeah, it comes into play every day, every time the phone rings. It could be a question about that. Again, for DOT, it's kind of a non-issue. Marijuana is a prohibited substance. If you test positive for marijuana in a DOT regulated drug testing program, it's a violation. Now, for the non-regulated industries, there may be states that have some restrictions on marijuana. There may be states that favor employees doing what they want to do on their own time. So there may be laws that restrict it. In California, you can't really use urine or hair for a marijuana drug test and take adverse action. So you're kind of limited to an oral fluid test, which is testing the parent drug. But basically, every employer in a state that has a medical marijuana law and or a recreational marijuana law, they need a written drug-free workplace policy that talks about marijuana. Are we going to test for it or are we not going to test for it? Are we going to offer any type of accommodation for a medical marijuana user, or are we going to be strictly zero tolerance? Marijuana is prohibited. If you test positive, you have a violation. But are we going to terminate based on that, or maybe are we going to give a second chance based on that? So with non-regulated employers, they have to be aware and get professional guidance as to what the laws in their state say, and they need professional guidance as to a well-crafted drug-free workplace policy that addresses marijuana.
Yeah, I imagine there's a lot of confusion out there with different states and a variety of different laws, and probably employers also that have multiple states. So I imagine they have to have either different policies or additions for that. How would they handle it if they're in multiple states? Would that be subject to each state or the state of the parent company, or is it going to vary depending on the circumstances?
Yeah, what we typically do, Tom, is we look at the state where the company is located, where their corporate office is, where their main headquarters are, and we have a discussion with HR and safety and other thought leaders at the company, and we determine the marijuana policy for their home state, okay? Then we look at what other states that they operate in, and will that policy that we just developed for their home state still apply, or do we need a policy addendum for, let's say there's 7 other states they operate in, and maybe a couple of them it's not really good to test for marijuana, like in New York where you really can't, okay? So there has to be a carve out. There has to be, like, we call it a state addendum for those particular extra states that says, okay, in New York, we're not going to test for marijuana at all. In California, we're going to use oral fluid for marijuana testing. So we're going to use oral fluid for all of our testing to make it easy in California. In the state of Washington, has a similar law to California, but it only affects pre-employment testing. So in the state of Washington, we might drop marijuana for pre-employment testing, or we might only use oral fluid testing, because using urine or hair, both in California and in the state of Washington, we're detecting that someone used marijuana, but maybe it was Friday night or Saturday night or Sunday, and those states don't want us taking any adverse action against an employee that smoked pot on their own time.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially with all the changes that are out there. I think that's something that's constantly changing. And, with the marijuana laws, you definitely have to keep up with it. But, kind of keeping on our topic of focus, which is panels, have there been any major changes to actual panels that have happened either recently or maybe upcoming?
Good question, Tom. So if we go back almost 30 years, okay, when the federal government wrote their mandatory guidelines for workplace drug testing, which is the original document that lays out the foundation for drug testing in America. Okay, they developed a 5-panel drug test. But back then, that 5-panel drug test was different than it is today. And there's been several versions of it over the years. And unfortunately, the laboratories still have the old versions on hand. So it's like when you order a drug test, you better be making sure you're ordering the most current version, because the original versions didn't have methamphetamine with the amphetamine, didn't have heroin with the opiates, didn't have the expanded opiates, the hydrocodones, the oxycodones, etc. So it's changed, and we added heroin. Okay, we added expanded opiates. So we've had at least 3 different versions, and you want to make sure that, because you got to know what you're testing for, and you don't want to be surprised. So it is important that, there have been changes, and very recently, SAMHSA has added fentanyl to the required testing for federal employees. Employees of the federal government are now required for the 5-panel plus fentanyl. Now, people will ask, well, what about DOT? Well, DOT normally adopts exactly what SAMHSA does and what SAMHSA says. But it takes DOT a little bit longer to adopt it, because they have to put out a proposed regulation, and they have to get comments from the public and from the industry, and they have to evaluate those comments. And it could take a year before DOT, even longer potentially, for DOT to add fentanyl. But for employees of the federal government, currently today, we have fentanyl. And for non-DOT employees, they can certainly add fentanyl to their testing panel.
Yeah, and so I know fentanyl's been around, for a while for testing for non-regulated. So is it or is it not required yet for DOT?
It is definitely not required for DOT. And again, as I mentioned, it's going to take time. It may take a year, maybe longer. I don't have a crystal ball, but I know that in government and in DOT, there's a process, and those processes take time. And again, with DOT, they're going to have to put out a proposed rule change. They're going to have to get comments and give a comment period of time. They're going to have to evaluate those comments and then make their final decisions, and then publish the rule. And then fentanyl would be required for DOT testing. And as that happens, we would likely see that employers that are non-regulated would follow through with now the new standard 5-panel test, which would be the 5-panel plus fentanyl.
Excellent. And, with all the changes coming up, what else, do you see on the horizon? I know you're really tapped into the things going on in the drug testing world. So what do you see? I know you don't have your crystal ball or your magic drug testing 8-ball, but what do you see coming up that might be of interest to our audience here?
Sure. And, the regulatory changes take time, federal, DOT, any state laws. But in general, we're going to see some new panels considered to be common, okay, where multiple laboratories would say maybe this is the structure of a 12-panel. Currently today it's 5 and 10, because one lab may have a 12 and the next lab may have a 12, but it's different drugs. I think instant testing is growing, both urine and oral fluid, and there's a lot of customization that could be made on panels for instant or rapid testing, and companies can pinpoint that these are the drugs that we want. And with urine, I believe it's like you can go up to about 14 panels. With oral fluid, I'm not sure it's quite 14 yet, but so you can be testing for a lot of different metabolites of drugs and have customization readily available on instant testing. So I think more instant testing, more oral fluid testing is kind of what I see to be on the horizon.
Yeah, and I think, having the discussion about panels, is important to understand that, especially if you're an employer out there, and appreciate the insights, that we have on that. With panels, you can test a lot of things. Urine, like you said, has been around for a long time. A lot more things you can test with. I think we're starting to see more and more things with the oral fluid and with hair testing, although both those are more limited in the panels or the drugs they can test for at this point.
Absolutely. Good insight there, Tom. Do you have any other thoughts or any other questions you have on this topic about drug testing panels, or experiences or questions that you've come across lately?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people are confused about that. I think just the things you've talked about so far today really, crystallize and clarify exactly what we mean by panels. Because I know when we get calls or our team takes calls from employers and individuals, they're very confused about what it actually means, what's included, what can be tested for, also what can be tested for with what specimen type. So whether it's instant, whether it's lab-based, whether it's hair, oral fluid, our urine, those are all different things that come into play. And I think especially if it's an employer out there that's looking at these, making the best decision, taking into account the state laws, the legal considerations that you brought up, as well as, what panels make sense for them, and having a conversation with somebody who can make a good recommendation is something that I think is very important, because that way you can make a very informed decision, and it does go into affects legal liability, affects your risk tolerance, all those kind of things too. So understanding the panels that you're looking to test for, having somebody that can make those recommendations, I think is huge.
Outstanding. And Tom, for our audience listeners, if they were to go to nationaldrugscreening.com, okay, how would they find out more about panels?
Well, we have a great search tool. We always claim it's greater than Google in this regard, because we know the information there is accurate. But there's a search icon right there on nationaldrugscreening.com. And in addition to the menu items, you can simply type in the panels you're looking for. You can click on order a test. You can see some of the more common panels there, and they're actually spelled out what drugs are in there. And there's some drop downs with information on the different specimen types, as well as the panels available for them. So a lot of information there. The search is a great way to find that information.
Yeah, that's awesome. So a lot of information that we have on our website, nationaldrugscreening.com. Mm-hmm. You can also go, and some of them are videos. When you go to some of those pages, you can also go to our YouTube channel, nationaldrugscreening.com, and type in panels under search, and you'll find several videos that Tom, you and I have put together on drug testing panels. So hopefully this has been informative to our audience about drug testing panels, which is, a list of drugs that we're testing for in a panel name. So 5 panel, 10 panel, and in some cases it's a 10 panel plus something else, plus fentanyl, plus tramadol, etc. So thanks again, Tom. I appreciate you bringing these questions here. I am going to turn it over to our producer, Jesse, to be able to give a shout out to our sponsor and to close out the show. But before I do that, I think I'm supposed to mention something like, don't forget to like, subscribe, share with your friends, ring the bell, make comments, and help us send your questions about updated topics or questions or comments about this topic. Jesse, did I do that right?
You did perfect, and you're getting better every episode. So awesome job, Joe. No, because it is important if people want to reach out and learn more, because this, I feel like a lot of these episodes, we're getting a lot of comments with pretty comprehensive questions, which we really enjoy, because people want to follow up, people want to learn more, and you're creating curiosity with some of these topics. So, of course, go ahead and reach out. I know, Joe, you also have a forward-facing email or number. You want to put that out there?
It's real simple, joe@nationaldrugscreening.com.
Yeah.
Just like the website. Put Joe in front of it.
Yeah, so if you want, like a super comprehensive answer to a question, then certainly reach out to Joe via his email. And once again, we want to thank Joe Riley and Associates for the sponsorship today. Again, for consulting, for the drug testing industry. If you have any questions regarding that, if you need expert witness services, marketing, sales consultation, policy writing, new startup comprehensive training and consultation, as well as drug-free workplace trainings, reach out to Joe Riley and Associates today. And with that, good job, gentlemen.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thanks much.